This is Regenerative Skills, the podcast helping you to learn the skills and solutions to create an abundant and connected future. I'm your host, Oliver Gaucher. So at this point, I think we all know that YouTube videos, social media posts, and blog snippets will only get you so far. If you really want to develop the knowledge and skills you need to live regeneratively, you need the thorough information in a full book. Through their diverse range of publications, New Society Publishers' books explore topics that are at the forefront of creating positive change in our world. From regenerative agriculture and permaculture to social justice and eco-conscious living, their books cover a wide spectrum of subjects that empower readers to lead more regenerative and fulfilling lives. So whether you're a seasoned environmentalist, a curious beginner, or someone simply seeking inspiration and guidance on your journey towards regenerative living, New Society Publishers is here to support you every step of the way. If you subscribe right now to their newsletter at newsociety.com, you'll be the first to receive sneak peeks at new content and get discounts on upcoming title releases. You'll even get an exclusive discount code on their first purchase of books, ebooks, or audiobooks. So sign up today at newsociety.com. Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. So I've explored the topic of seed saving and breeding a number of times in previous episodes, and it's become such a passion of mine that it's the primary focus of my early work here on my own farm as I begin to get the main patterns and infrastructure developed. Now, a new angle on this subject, however, is the more direct and professional operation of producing seed to sell. Now, this requires even more planning and coordination, as each plant has its own peculiarities of reproduction and conditions of harvest, processing, and preservation. Now, luckily, I've got a seasoned veteran of seed production to illuminate the key considerations and preparations to build a successful seed production enterprise, including on top of an existing market garden. Now, in this conversation, I've got Dan Brisebois, a seasoned cooperative farmer, to discuss the various aspects of seed farming from his own slow start in the beginning to the present-day success of his enterprise that was founded in 2004. Now, he starts by touching on his background and his shift from agricultural engineering into farming, driven by a passion discovered during summer farm work. Dan elaborates on his cooperative farm structure, which is expanded to include 11 members and 9 member applicants. He then delves into his journey of integrating seed production into his market gardening enterprise, spurred by encounters with seed enthusiasts and the fascination with cross-pollination and plant breeding. Dan also shares practical insights into the equipment, processes, and considerations for seed harvesting, cleaning, and storage, emphasizing the importance of knowledge over technological sophistication. He explains his labeling and tracking system for plant breeding and offers advice on balancing genetic diversity with achieving true-to-type consistency. Now, furthermore, Dan reflects on the unexpected discoveries and the rewarding moments in plant breeding and highlights the profitability factors when growing seeds for bulk versus small packets. And lastly, Dan touches on the impact of market demand for specialty seeds and advises aspiring seed growers on where to get started, mentioning his book, podcast, and additional resources provided through his Farmer Spreadsheet Academy. So there's tons of resources to pick through. Now, for those of you like me passionate about the unlimited potential of working with seed, or who perhaps already have a garden or a market veggie production enterprise, and maybe want to add some additional value to what you're already growing, this is going to be a great episode for you. Quickly though, before we start the conversation, I want to mention that thanks to my good friends at New Society Publishers, we're offering a free copy of Dan's book, The Seed Farmer, to members of our Discord community. Now, in order to be eligible to win, all you have to do is send me a direct message on the Regenerative Skills Discord platform, and I'll select a winner 1 week after this episode goes live. If you're not already in there, it's free to join through the link on our website homepage and our bio on Instagram. I'm looking forward to sending a copy of the book to one of you real soon. So with that out of the way, I'll hand things over now to Dan Brisebois. Welcome, Dan. Thanks so much for making time. How are you doing over there?
Oh, I'm doing great. It's a nice, not too hot day, but not too cold either.
That's exactly what you want. You were saying that you had a little bit of a slow start to your growing season. Tell me about how things are moving forward right now with your cooperative farm, just to get us oriented about, what your context is and what your farm looks like.
So that's a big that's a big first question. Okay. Uh, so we have a our farm, Turnasol Cooperative Farm, it started in 2004 with five members of a worker co-op. We now have 11 members and we have and nine non-members. So those non-members might future become future members. And so at this point our co-op is in full I would say our farm business is sort of at a plateau where we like it to be, but the co-op's in full expansion as we're trying to get the non-members to become members and to onboard the new members so that they feel ownership in what we're doing and that they're excited about everything.
That's really exciting. I feel like there's a whole episode just to be done about this cooperative farming model that I would love to explore at a later time. But let's go into, first of all, your background and how you got started in farming.
I think, ultimately the background is that I had to work in the backyard for most of my childhood. We lived sort of in suburbia, the countryside also, but I don't come from a farm family, and not, at least not recently, or I mean, in recent generations. And so I just had to work outdoors a lot. And when I went to school in agricultural engineering, thinking I was going to work in soil and water quality. But I started to work on farms during the summer, and I love the farm work more than I like the engineering work, but I loved the farming work, and that just I realized I'd sort of been doing that kind of stuff my whole life, and just decided to jump in. And I was at this ag campus I was at. I was surrounded by folks like me, but who were really interested in starting a farm, and it kind of inspired me to want to do the same thing. And that's kind of how it began. I started working on farms, and then next step was to start a farm with some friends. And when we were tired of making other people's mistakes, we wanted to make our own mistakes.
Yeah, that was big in my transition too, because I was working first of all with permaculture farms and natural building. And much like you, I did so many of my mistakes with clients and in other projects and a lot of volunteering in other places of the world that now I'm making tons more mistakes here in central Catalonia. Okay, so then as you started to get into this cooperative model, it's not super logical for a lot of people who are focused on market gardening and vegetable production to also add an element of their own seed production. How did that occur to you to integrate that in with the enterprise you already had?
When I was an apprentice and working on other farms, I met two other people who were really into seeds, and they just kept talking about it. And I met them. They work on another farm. I went to visit them, and they were harvesting some red Russian kale that had overwintered, and I just started to realize there was seed everywhere, and so it just got me interested. And then on the farms that I worked on, I started to look for overwintered seed crops or accidental seed crops, and it just became something that I was fascinated with. And I feel like I'm kind of already wandering a little bit, but I would say what I was always curious about is cross-pollination. It's such a big thing you're supposed to avoid when you're saving seed, and I just wanted to know what happens when different things cross together. And that started to be a big interest for me, is just letting things go to seed and seeing what would happen, and trying to and ultimately it became plant breeding down the line. But that's kind of what sparked a lot of my early interests getting into seed. And when we started our farm, I knew I wanted to grow some of my own seed, and did that. But I knew that you could sell seeds. So I approached a couple local seed companies and asked them if they ever bought seed from growers. And two companies gave me some tomato seeds to grow out, and we started to grow seeds for them. And then as our catalog expanded, we put together, so this is like the mid 2000s, and we put together a one sheet list of like 25 varieties. It became our mini seed catalog, and we started a mail order business that way. And so it was kind of just interest in seeing the other part of seeing the other part of the plant life is what really got me into to growing seed, as opposed to just focusing on harvesting the lettuce. Like with carrots or beets. So lettuce, almost all market growers see it go to seed. But carrots and beets, radishes, a lot of folks never see those go to seed because they harvest them or they get winter killed, depending on your climate. And I just like seeing that whole other part.
Yeah, absolutely. This is very similar to my own growing interest in seed as well. Part of this is what can come out of adapting them to your conditions
and the variability of open pollinated varieties. Over time, of course, as things get acclimated and the genetics start to become more conducive to whatever challenges and difficulties that you have in your area, presumably they can become much easier to grow as well. And then to say nothing of all the different varieties that can come out of cross-pollination, hybridization as well. Now, there is added complexity in managing these same varieties for seed. Like you said, many of them are harvested before they ever go to seed, or once they do, they take a while to mature and otherwise occupy areas of the garden that you might have on a faster turnover. And depending on what it is you're aiming for, this could be valuable space in a limited area that you might think of, oh, well, maybe this isn't going to pay off. How have you come to look at this and work the added complexity into the rotation of cultivars that you have?
Well, not all crops are the same, and that's really the important part of the answer. And what I'm trying to get new market growers to start growing seed, that's kind of really I really lean into. And I think another part is, are you just growing seed for yourself, or are you trying to grow seed for sale? So if you're trying to grow seed for sale, that's another thing. But if you're growing seed for yourself, it can be fairly simple. Like if you're growing an open pollinated tomato, and if you harvest 5 or 6 fruit, the seeds from those 5 or 6 fruit will produce hundreds, if not thousands, of seeds. And you're going to be fine for a couple years, depending on how many you grow. So that does not impact the space that you're dedicated to growing. Like that's if there's no change. Same with peppers, eggplants. Now, I'm going to just slip in something before we mention other crops. There's for some of those crops, which are predominantly self-pollinated, they'll barely cross-pollinate. So you could have 2 tomatoes side by side, keep the seed of each of them, and you might not see any crossing. So just do it. Now,
the outcrossing rates can vary a lot, especially with tomatoes. They mostly have self-pollinated little tiny flowers.
Totally. But so something like salad greens, those you need more seed, and you're more directly competing with the vegetable crop because if you're growing an arugula crop to seed, an arugula crop for market, it's 4 weeks in the ground. You could flip it and put another salad green after it. But you could also harvest that arugula 2 or 3 times, depending on your climate and time of year, and put it in your salad mix and sell it, and then let the plant go to flower. And then if you wait another 2 or 3 months, you're going to wind up with a seed crop. And you can get a fair amount of seed from a crop that you just let go to seed. And so there is an opportunity cost in that you didn't put another market crop there. But if you're putting another market crop, you have to do the flip, the bed prep, you have to sow it, all those things. So those are tasks that you're saving yourself. You don't have the sellable crop at the end, but you do have the seed. And the seed, if you do sell it, it has a value. But if you don't sell it, it still has it ultimately has a big value, but it also has a dollar value that you are saving. And if you're buying arugula for 20 or 30 bucks a pound, maybe that's not a big deal. But if you were growing something like Tokyo Bacana or some other Nebraska green that might be 70 or 100 or $110 a pound, that's actually starts to add up a little bit. So you could see a savings on your seed bill by growing some of your own seed. So it can work out on the balance sheet. Saving money is not always why I push people to get into seed. That's an added bonus down the line, and there's steps to get there. But so it doesn't have to compete directly with the market crop. Some things like beans is going to be in the ground longer, and I would even, if you're a small market gardener, should you even be growing beans? Is that a profitable crop for you? Let alone start to grow the seed for them. I do love beans. I'm nothing against beans, but just in the market garden context.
Right. There's all sorts of these criteria to consider. You just listed quite a few important considerations here. What else would you want people to have in mind when considering actually growing for the intention of seed?
Well, I would say, first off, if you've not grown seed before, the reason when you're growing seed, you should not be thinking about saving biodiversity. You should not be thinking about preserving a variety for the future. You are an important link in the chain, but you are not the ultimate link right there. I think when you start growing seed, you're learning the skills of how to do it. That is really the most important thing. And so if you're new to seed, don't be too have too much burden on yourself about it, and be really look for learning. So I think things I would think about is how easy it is to integrate into your crop. So a fruiting crop that you're already harvesting as the fruit is so easy. Cut flowers, you kind of just don't deadhead some of them and you're going to get seed. The salad greens, there's more steps. If you're going to do roots, then you have to get the root, then you have to harvest it and overwinter it. So I would think a little bit about the quantity you need of seed, and I would think a bit about the life cycle and how it fits in. I would think about, does things cross-pollinate really easily or not? Most things cross-pollinate easily, but some crops like tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, lettuce, peas, beans, a few others, they can grow side by side and you won't really see crossing. Now, you're only going to have crossing if you have something else of another species of the same variety or another variety of the same species in the area to cross with. So that's usually you don't have to worry, even if it is an easy crosser. And I would say don't be worried about crossing too much either. If you are selling a named variety, then it's really important. If it's for your own farm use, crossing can be fun. In almost all cases, it's edible, probably still as delicious as the other crop, and you wind up with new flavors, new shapes, new looks, and new vegetables ultimately. So I think crossing is where things can get really interesting and you can start selecting out. So I don't know if that's dodging your question, but
no, not at all.
Considerations.
Yeah, no, those are all really important. Let's go a little deeper into that about crossing, because I think that's probably the one that I hear the most from people who are reluctant to give it a try. And they're concerned that they're going to get some kind of strange hybrid mutant that they won't even be able to do anything with. And like you said, this isn't a danger or even much of a worry at all for most of the varieties that you're going to be having in a regular garden or a market garden. And there are two main categories that tend to easily cross in between each other, and those are brassicas and the curcubit family. And you have a whole section on the book that talk just about these two. Maybe you want to go into that.
Yeah. So I'll start with the brassicas. The brassicas, there are, I don't know, 4 or 5 different species. So when I'm thinking about brassicas, I'm thinking predominantly about brassica greens. I caution, I don't encourage a lot of new growers to get into like cauliflower and broccoli and Brussels sprouts, both because they're trickier to grow, and also you don't need that much seed. So it's a lot of work for so little seed. Whereas brassica greens, if you're a salad green grower, you're growing through pounds of seeds every year. So it actually makes a difference on your operation. So there's 4 or 5 species, like there's arugula is its own species, then there's Brassica rapa, which is Mizuna, Tatsoi, Tokyo Bacana, others too. There's Brassica gentiana, which is all the spicy mustards, like the reds and the green mustards. And then, I mean, those are, I guess, the 3 main leafy greens. There's also like kales, which are Brassica oleracea or Brassica napus. But those greens, if you have arugula and you have one Brassica rapa and you have one Brassica gentiana and you have an oleracea kale side by side, fully in flower, you will probably not see any crossing between the 4 of them. Whereas if you had 3 rapas, like a Tokyo Bacana, a Mizuna, and a Tatsoi side by side, you will see dramatic crossing between them. So that's the important thing to know. Now, so you can grow a diversity of crops without crossing if you know the species. Now, if you have a couple Brassica rapa greens in flower and they cross together, it's not going to give you what you expected to get, but you'll wind up with something different and fun. So I had some Tokyo Bacana, what was it actually? Some Yukina Savo, which kind of like a Tatsoi that accidentally crossed with this is a variety from Wild Garden State. I don't know if even offered anymore, but it was called their pink petiole mix, which had like green leaves but pink and purple stems. And I didn't realize they were the same species. And I grew them side by side. And then they crossed. Well, and I saw they crossed because the shattered seed looked different than it should have. Like the seed that I hadn't harvested that fell on the ground, and when it germinated from rain, when I looked at it, I was like, oh, it crossed. And the stuff that it gave, it wound up looking a little bit like Tatsoi, but with purple and pink stems. It was pretty. It was totally edible. I couldn't sell it as either of the varieties because it was different, but I had a new thing that I could put in my salad greens, and I started selecting out of that. And now I have a variety that we call our rainbow tatsoi that is a much purpler plant. It's really beautiful, but all along the journey to get to that, it was just, so I guess what I would kind of go back to the initial idea. The crossing was not a problem. We still had salad greens that were tasty and they were unique. No other market grower at our markets who are in baskets in our area have these greens unless they buy the seeds from us.
Yeah.
But so brassica greens, it was really exciting to see that crossing. Now cucurbits, specifically squash, on the other hand, there are three species of squash. There's the peppo squashes like delicata, acorn, spaghetti squash. There's the maxima squash, so cucurbita maxima, which are the kind of larger ones. There's like the kabochas and the curries and the giant pumpkins. And then there's the moscata squash, like the butternuts or musqué de Provence or the cheese pumpkins. So there's other species too, but I'm going to focus on those three because they're the most common. If you grow one of each of those species side by side, they won't cross. You grow two of the same species, so you grow an acorn squash between delicata, it's going to cross up. Now, in the case of brassica greens, when they cross up, they're fun. It gives something that's edible, something that's new. I'm totally into it. When squash crosses up, so it's still edible. It's still fun from a certain perspective because you don't know what you're going to get. But it's really hard to sell mystery squash to your clients. And it can be hard to even feed it to your family. You wind up with stuff that's much stringier than you expect it to be. It's too fibrous. If it's a summer squash, which is supposed to be tender, that crosses with a pumpkin, which is supposed to have storage attributes, it doesn't give the best zucchini afterwards or the best summer squash. So that's where I have found cross-pollination to be the less fun, is in the squash family. But almost everywhere else, like if you had two beets that cross-pollinate, it's like if you have a golden beet or a Kyoja beet crossing with a red beet, you're going to get different colors. It's going to be fun. If you have different types of radishes that cross, I think it's the beginning of a journey. Squash crossing, I don't like it. and in part, it's because I don't have enough place to grow enough plants to see all that crossing grow out. And it takes us a little bit of the reliability out of it. Now, I do know some people who do enjoy that, and they're welcome to enjoy it. But I find it's not a great fit for most market gardeners.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's adding a level of complexity that many people will dedicate a PhD research career to getting a new variety of a melon or of a squash or something. And adding that to the complexity of a market garden is probably not compatible. But like you said, so many of the other opportunities within that absolutely can be. Now, when it comes to the tools, the considerations, the planning that then go beyond, in some cases, the things that you're growing out to seed, or in some cases, just the processing of, let's say, tomatoes or other fruit crops that have the seed within them, what are some of the considerations or the things that you can start to prepare for if you're getting into new to this?
So like you're talking about equipment? Is that kind of where
you mentioned a couple of very simple pieces of equipment, some of which you can even get secondhand. We'll go through, I guess, categories of considerations as we go. Let's start with tools.
Okay. So maybe I'll break it also down into the steps of the growing. So the first part of growing a seed crop is you're just growing the vegetable, and that's the same as if you're growing the vegetable. And then it goes to flower and then to seed. And then you have to harvest the seed. So let me just close this.
Yeah, take your time.
Yeah. This is actually the garage with my car, so I'm curious, but I'll talk to them later. Don't worry about it right now. Okay. So there's different steps of so harvest. So you grow the crop and then you get to harvest, and I mean there's a diversity of different crops, but broadly you're going to be harvesting seeds that have, dry pods on them, or plants that have dry pods on them with seeds in it. And you can use a lot of harvest knives or secateurs to just get the plants off. And then we'll harvest them. So you could harvest them into bins or totes. But what we harvest them into often is like pieces of landscape fabric, a piece that's maybe like 4 or 5 foot by 10 foot that we just lay the plants straight on. And we used to really go focus on bins, but laying things on tarps means that if the seed shatters, it's there on the tarp. It's easy to get. And we can kind of roll the tarp up with the plants to make, this is something that Frank Morden from Wild Garden Seed calls a jelly roll, but like we make a kind of a roll out of the landscape fabric, and we can put it on a cart and bring it back, and we put it into our greenhouse. So that's at the harvest. I think landscape fabric or pieces of tarps are great things to work with. And then when we get into, and then you want to have a place where you can let the plants continue to dry down. If you're in an area where it does not rain in the summer, leave the plants outdoors. That's fine. But we're not in that area. So we use our nursery greenhouse. So, and our nursery greenhouse, it's heavy. Like right now, this time of year in May, or we're June now, actually. In June, April, May, early June, it's packed with seedlings. But then by end of June, we barely have seedlings into it. And when we start harvesting seed at the end of July and early August, at that point, our greenhouse is almost empty, the nursery greenhouse. And so we start to bring in these tarps, unroll them on the benches, and just let the plants keep maturing there. Because you can harvest plants that are about 3/4 mature.
That's exactly what I was going to ask too. Like, so when you're folding them into the tarps or the fabric, are you pulling up the roots as well? Or are you kind of snipping them off at the base for them to be able to continue to mature? Like you said, if you're going to be getting them a little bit before those seeds are ready.
So we always snip the roots off.
Yeah.
Because there's dirt on those roots. And if the dirt mixes in with the seeds, it is a nightmare to clean out. Not impossible, but just avoid problems. That's the big thing in all steps of farming.
That's a good pro tip right there. Yeah.
And so we'll always cut the roots and leave them in the field, like in the ground. We cut them above ground and the plant above ground and put it on a tarp. Now, different plants mature in different ways, but a lot of plants, the flowers emerge gradually. So the seed pods will emerge gradually and they'll mature down gradually. And that means that there's no one time where you're going to harvest all the seed on the plant. You can't. So it can mean that if you're in a home garden or a small scale, you can go and take a brassica plant and shake it into a bin when the seed is ready and leave the rest of the plant there, and then come back another week and just gradually harvest and get almost all the seed. But if you're growing anything more than a few plants, it's going to be frustrating to do that. So
that's not practical.
We look at a point where there's about half to 2/3 of the pods are pretty mature on the plant, and we'll harvest it then, and we'll bring it in. And some of those immature plants are going to after ripen and get to maturity. And in some cases, like stuff like beans and peas, beans especially, we'll harvest when they look greener than you think they'll mature down, because like we're in a place where we can have big frosts mid-September. And if we see a big frost or like a crazy rain period coming, we will pull in whole bean plants that are not quite there. We'll put them indoors, and after 1 or 2 weeks, the pods will be dried down. The beans have filled out. The germination is going to be good. It's always a little bit scary to do it, but after years of doing it, we know that it works, and it works for other crops too. Not all crops will do that, but a number will. And so we'll harvest them in. We'll bring them in to the nursery. They'll be spread out on tarps, and we'll let them keep drying. It's important to not pile things too heavily because they can kind of just compost in place.
Oh yeah, especially if there's moisture, right?
Yes, yeah, it's hard to have no moisture, and if the leaves are a bit green, that's going to be releasing moisture. Well, sometimes if we're a little bit worried, we'll also, or even a lot worried, we will rotate the plants on a daily basis to kind of get good airflow through it. And then when the plants are nice and dry and crispy, that's when we'll thresh them. And at a basic level, and this is like, I mentioned brassicas a lot on this, but brassicas, beans, peas, you can take them out, put the pods on the ground on the tarp, and just stomp on them with clean boots. And we do a lot of threshing like that. There are some small threshers you can purchase, like stationary threshers that might cost, that cost about maybe $1,000 to $1,500 US to kind of as a common exchange currency that can process a lot of crops. But stuff like brassica greens, we don't really need them to go through a machine. Lettuce, we don't need to go through a machine. Something like peas or beans, it makes it easier if we run it through a thresher. Corn, sorghum, okra, some of those go quicker if we run them through a thresher.
Sure,
But
I can imagine being a little bit finicky, some of those.
yeah, yeah. And so, but you can do a lot just by stomping on them. And then you get into the high tech part, which is you need screens and you need fans. And I say this the high tech part a little bit tongue in cheek, because you can just have any kind of screen. It can be colanders and sieves that you might have in your kitchen, strainers that for pasta that you take out and you use to, I mean, they gotta be clean, but to use to clean out the seed. But you can also make your own screens by using hardware cloth. So we get hardware cloth from the hardware store that's 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch mesh, and we just make a frame with wood and then make our own screens that way. We make them the same size as our harvest bins, so it's easy to just use them together. And most of our initial screening is done with that. And then we'll winnow it, so that's blowing air through it to blow the chaff out. For heavier seed, you can do it outdoors, but the lighter the seed, the more you want to avoid unexpected gusts. So we'll use 2 box fans indoors to blow, like we pour the seed in front of the fans, and it just blows the chaff out. And so we do this always over a tarp, because we want the heaviest. If we make a mistake and blow things too hard, we want to be able to capture it and redo it.
Yeah.
But the heaviest seed should fall into a bin close to the fans. And just those two, like homemade screens and then box fans, which are fairly cheap, that'll get the seed pretty clean. In a few cases, like with lettuce, it could be worth investing in a professional screen. Like there's these 5/16 of an inch screens that it's just like this, the same size as the lettuce seed. And it's just so nice to run it through. But short of that, homemade screens and box fans is most of what you need. And that's kind of running through the equipment. And most market gardeners have access to all of that.
Yeah, I was going to say, when I was
All
reading
market gardeners have access to that.
Yeah, for sure. It's like, for some reason I thought it was going to be more complex. I know that some technology has come a long way, and maybe if you're a massive seed operation, you've got machines to do some of this processing for you. But really, you guys are a good sized market garden. I was, for some reason, expecting there to be more complexity in the operation. I was really impressed at how simple you've got this down to.
We do have some more complex equipment, but it's really in the cleaning later on to get it. I'm going to say perfect, but I mean that like 95% perfect.
Sure. Enough to get it into a packet and have a satisfied customer. Right?
Yes, exactly. If you're using your own seed, it doesn't have to be as clean as if you're selling the seed.
Right.
And even though you can do a really good job with box fans, there's a few things that get a little bit more finicky. So there's a machine called the Winnow Wizard, which does even better winnowing job than box fans do. We have an office clipper, which is like a fanning mill that we can run through all types of different sizes screens to get tricky lots clean. But that's because we run a seed company and are carrying like 250 varieties, and we grow big seed lots. Like it's at that point that you need that machine more. If you're growing a few varieties, and like there's a big way before you get to that point. And I visited a lot of seed farms over the years, and I've been surprised how few of them have a lot of tech. And sometimes they're growing 5 or 6 or even more of acres of seed, and they might basically have screens and fans. Some have other equipment, but some don't. And it's the biggest thing that makes a difference is not your equipment, it's your knowledge. Knowing when to harvest the seed at the right moment, knowing when to thresh the seed at the right moment. Is if you thresh it too late, sometimes there's little sticks and branches that clog up the cleaning process. Threshing just a little bit earlier might make it easier. Like learning all those tricks is more important than having a fancy machine. And that's what takes a lifetime to learn. And that's why I emphasize when I'm talking to new seed people, learn how to grow seed. Don't worry about the long game. I mean, the long game really is learning how to grow seed, because every seed lot that you work with, you're going to know new things. And at the beginning, it might feel it is so unprofitable for the time that you spend in it. And then after 2 or 3 seed crops, you realize you could do the same thing in a fraction of the time. So it's just learning. It's just so important.
And I would imagine, like you said, that there's a jump between trying this out, getting a couple varieties to go to seed, successfully harvesting it, and then going into operation, making it a major part of your business. And I'm sure you could shortcut the learning curve on that by going and learning with the different seed producer, seeing what their operation is, maybe getting a couple weeks or months of experience with them instead of having to figure all that yourself.
Yes, for sure. I mean, my advice to market growers in general is always before you start the farm, work on other people's farms. Like, there's
Yes.
some things you cannot learn from a YouTube video. There's
Yes.
phenomenal books out there. Like, it's not the same thing as muscle memory. Going out and bunching 200 bunches of carrot every day for 6 months is going to change the way you bunch carrots. You're not going to
Yeah.
learn that from YouTube.
Yeah.
And it's the same with seed. If you have the time to go and work on seed farms. So we've had people who've worked for us for a number of years and started their own seed farm, and they're jumping in at a higher level than anyone else would. And I think so that is definitely something to do. Even spending 1 week on a seed farm, you're going to have a different feel for it than, I mean, I have a fantastic book. It will teach you all kinds of things, but still that 1 week on a seed farm is going to teach you so much. And so I think it really is valuable getting that experience, but there's so many crops out there, and there's no farm that's going to grow all of those crops to seed. And so there's a certain point where you're just going to have to start trialing yourself. Now, if you do want to become a commercial seed grower, probably what's important is to start with the narrow set of crops. Don't try to grow all of them to the point where you're a pro, but more, you grow 3 or 4. If you're going to grow tomatoes, maybe a squash, maybe beans, you figure those out and you improve those skills. And when they get good enough that you can scale up to grow a seed lot for sale, then start to add other crops also. So, and there's a lot of market growers who approach me asking, can we grow seed for you? And my first question is, have you ever grown seed before? And it's just learning yourself for fun is what's going to give you the opportunity to get better. And yeah, so start narrow rather than broad with a lot of crops.
I think that's it for anything that you're trying to get to a professional level on, is master a couple of things and build on that success. And I say that as well, given the fact that that's probably the thing I'm worst at taking my own advice on. I get really excited about growing new things all the time. You look at a seed catalog or you see somebody else growing other things. They're like, oh, I'm going to add that to the mix. And it gets complicated real fast, but it is still sound advice, especially if you're trying to make a living out of this. Okay, so we've got to a point now where you have cleaned the seed. Let's talk about the important considerations for storing and preserving it to make sure that you get good germination and viability from the seed you took all this time to clean and process.
The really important thing thinking about storing seed is thinking about, like, what do you do when you start seed, right? In the spring, you're adding especially moisture and you're adding warmth. Those are the things that you want to add to get seed to go. So if you don't want seed to sprout, you're doing the opposite. You don't want to add moisture and you don't want to add heat. Now, the most important thing, and I cannot emphasize this enough, is the seed has to be dry. When you put seed into a sealed container, if there's any moisture in it, it's going to start to mold. It might start to germinate, but it also might start to mold. So that means, like, it can be hard to measure humidity. There's different, I mean, I know there's tools, and then there's also tricks. Like, if I have a bean seed, I will bite onto the bean seed, and if it dents, then I know there's still moisture in it. Whereas if it cracks, then I know that it's dry enough to put into storage. And you can also hit it with a hammer, and if it shatters, it's dry enough. If it smushes, it still has too much moisture. So we let seed out in the air in open bins for weeks, almost months, before we store it. Some of it is that, like, we're letting it sit to get to the point where we can clean it, but we do let it keep sitting to just have that moisture evacuate. And when we put seed if we bring seed into a cold room or into a storage facility, or when we pack it up, actually, I should say, when we're packing up seed, we always do it on a dry day. If if it's an overcast, rainy day and the air is ambient, there's a lot of ambient humidity in the air, it will get captured in that seed too. So try to pack it up on a dry day. And we put it into a container. We usually use like Ziploc bags, but it could go into jars or plastic containers. The thing about jars is if you drop them, there's a lot of glass. So we avoid that, but you could use it if you want. But we want something that's not breathable, and we get the seed into it, and we want it to just be dry. Dryness is number one. The second most important thing is, I would say, constant temperature is more important than cool, but it's constant temperature, even if it's room temperature. And the reason constant temperature is important is that in the spring, seeds go through a period where the temperature, it gets cold, hot, cold, hot. Those are signs for the plant to break dormancy and start germinating. Even if they're not going to germinate in storage, they're just trying to get primed a little bit by that alternating temperature. So if your storage conditions are doing like that, are acting like that, it's going to shorten the life of the seed. So you want to have something that's more constant temperature. If you can keep it at 10 degrees Celsius, that's fantastic. But if you can only keep that some of the period and then it's going to get warm and cold again, you're better off just being a little bit warmer right up from the start. And for a lot of my early seed life, we were storing seed in our apartment, and that meant that, in hot summer days, or like, it would be at 25, 26 in the apartment, sometimes even higher than that. And we had seed that lasted 7, 8, 9 years in those conditions without being affected. Now, I wouldn't bank on long-term storage in those conditions, but a couple of years at room temperature is going to be fine if it's dry and constant temperature. You could add in, if you want more rules, it could be added in to have it out of light, but that's not as important as the other two things.
Sure, most of your seeds are not going to germinate under light conditions. They're meant to be under the ground, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say you've got some seed, you've had it for a while, and you're not sure if it's still viable. You've got some good tricks in the book to test to see if it's going to germinate or not.
So the easiest is to take a seedling tray, some potting soil, and then sprinkle some of that seed on it, just like, a pinch full, and then water it, and then see if it germinates over the next couple days, and if a bunch of it germinates, you can anecdotally say the seed is good. That's not good enough to sell the seed. Like, you want to do a more controlled germination test in that case. But for most home growers, if you have seed left over, either from your own harvest or seed from a previous year that you purchased, just trying to germinate a pinch of it is going to give you a good idea. Now, if you want a better information, then you could take, a coffee filter or blotter paper if you have it, but coffee filter would do fine, and moisten it, count out a set number of seeds. 100's a great number, but it could be 10, 20, 50 seeds, and then put, kind of roll it up or fold it in half, and then put it in a Ziploc bag, and then put it in a warm area for a few days, and then check every 3 or 4 days if something's germinated. And then you remove the germinated seeds, and you can have a special spreadsheet, but it could also be a piece of paper where you track how many sprouted seeds you removed. And then after a week or two, depending on the variety, you can just tally up what was sprouted, divide by the starting number of seeds, and then you have a germ rate. And that's why I like starting with 100 seeds, is that if I have 79
sample size, yeah,
it's a good sample size, but there's no math, because 79 seeds means 79%, whereas if it's, 50 seeds, it's easy to just multiply by 2, but still.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah. So, one thing I would just add is not all seed likes to be germinated in the same temperature. Some likes it cooler, some likes it, at room temp, some likes it a bit warmer. Knowing that really helps out. And you can find that in a lot of seed catalogs. It is in the book, but it's in a lot of other reference material too.
Yeah. Now, I'm curious too, because one of my primary motivations for growing for seed is that I live in a really weird little microclimate in a pocket of mountains in between the coast and the Pyrenees here in northeastern Spain. And we have really harsh frosts throughout the winter, and we get the high temperatures that they do that is kind of famous in this area. with a much shorter growing season. That on top of the fact that pretty much all of the soil around here is granite sand and is kind of lacking in nutrient. Like we're just in such a weird little growing area that almost nobody around us has any reference to. And so I'm hoping to come up with an adapted seed bank of things that do well under our crazy conditions. Now, I'm curious if you have some insights on how to label and keep track of seed over time in order to start to take advantage of these ideas of creating seed banks for the types of objectives that I mentioned.
Um,
Because at this point, the idea is to look through multiple generations, see if things do better or worse over time, maybe eventually start back crossing. I know we're starting to get into more of the details of breeding, but organization is something that I'm not good at yet, and I know that you cover in the book as well.
All right. I might actually take a tangent that I'm not sure is totally in the book. I don't know. I don't remember how much I went into depth. When you're writing, you have to decide what level of depth people actually want to know.
Yes.
There are folks like you who do want to know it all, but not everybody does. So this may or may not be in the book. If it's not, it's probably in blog posts I've written. But the way that I label, the way I keep track of things, so I have a spreadsheet and I have a numbering system. And the numbering system is partially inspired by John Navazio, who was a great seeds person who trained a lot of folks throughout the US and maybe in the world, but was associated with Organic Seed Alliance, but also worked on his own, and who passed away a year and a half ago. So he greatly inspired. He was one of my first seed mentors, and so he taught me a notation system that is kind of the basis of what I use. And so what I use is I'll have a 5-digit code for any line I'm working with or any lot I'm working with. And the two first digits are the last two numbers of the year. So something that I come in this year would be 25 because we're 2025. And then it's the next three digits will be like 001, 002. So it's like the first batch from that year, the second batch. Now, to add just a level of complexity with that is, now you could do it for all your crops in one system, but I actually separate, like I'll have my hot peppers with 25001 onwards, and then I'll have maybe sweet peppers 25001 onwards, my radishes 25001 onwards. So I always have a crop name associated with it also. I just don't have I don't know if you call it an accession, but I just don't have a code. Like 25001, there might be 3 or 4 in a given year, one for 4 different crops, let's say.
Right.
And what I have in my spreadsheet is I will write, so I have a column that has a drop-down menu for the different crops I'm working with. And then the next will be the code of what I'm working with, this year's code. So I'll assign at the beginning of the spring. Let's say I do a lot of work with poppies these days, and I have, I think, 6 poppies this year that we're working with. And so I have, it says poppy, and then 25001 through 25006. And then I'll have a column of where the seed comes from. And so in my case, in these poppies, it's coming from a previous year's selection. So it might be 25003 last year is one I decided to keep. And that's now this year's 25001. And so that's kind of the linking. And then I will have so this is what I'm planning. When I actually harvest, some cases I'll keep the whole batch of 25001 and I just call it 25001. Or sometimes I'll cull it hard and it's just one lot that comes out of it. Then it just keeps, so 25001 at the end of harvest is 25001. But there may also be, like in the case of the poppies, there's some of those lines that have still some genetic diversity in it. And maybe there's, let's say I've grown 25 poppies and 5, or let's say even 2 look different. I will then do, and I want to keep those, it'll be 25001-1. Will be those 2 that I like, and then 25001-2 will be the others. And so I'll record that in my spreadsheet at harvest, those 2 lines, and I'll have a column that says, how do I basically where it's coming from so I can track it back. And then I'll have a column that describes briefly what I like about it. I don't go too in depth, but I'll say, I like the color. This is a pink one that's frilly. I like these things. I also will upload a picture of it in
Okay.
many cases, especially if it's a visual thing that I really like.
Right, a visual trait that you can actually go back to, right? A
Yeah,
simple
so this is
description of a unique visual trait might not be adequate to actually know what you've got.
yeah. In this case, a picture can be 1,000 words. Sometimes a word is 1,000 pictures, but this case, it's the classic saying, and so that's how I'll keep track of things. Now, what you have to avoid doing is tracking everything ever. Just because you grew something out doesn't mean you have to keep all the details about it. If I decide I don't like something, I don't record it in these sheets,
Yeah.
because I'm not data farming, I want to just keep what really matters to me and what I love. And then I can and so knowing where something came from sometimes means that I know what it might look like, what I expect it to look like. But if I have a problem with one of these lots, I can go back to the previous generation or 2 generations before to get some of that seed and grow it out. So, yeah, so I think that's accurate of how I keep track of things.
No, that's really cool. And it's also, I mean, I can see you're very studious in keeping track of this, but it's also not unnecessarily complex. Like you're saying, you're not data farming, and your system, though it can be adapted or changed, works for you. And you could probably easily communicate that to anybody else and say, hey, go grab me this. This system is quite logical.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, we've tried to set it up. So in the breeding lots, I'm pretty much the only one who goes and gets them, but
Okay.
I could send somebody who could do it. But the rest of our seed warehouse, like our seed storage, we do use a similar kind of system for our lots, and we have it set it up so that anybody knows exactly where things are just based on these codes.
Yeah, I gotcha. Okay, so we've gotten through what I would consider most of the main considerations that could get somebody up and running. And there's so much more detail of this in the book. But now I'm really curious to explore some of the passion stuff behind this beyond just the practical, okay, let's produce for seed, let's make sure it's viable, let's collect it and such. So, you talk about this in the book as well. Maintaining heritage varieties, maybe breeding for specific traits. Where do you really come alive in this aspect? Like, what parts of this are your favorite?
There's a lot that I really love about seed. I would say I love the tactile nature of it. I love just working with seed. Like
Hmm.
it's the way the seed feels. I love also the sort of the mental exercise of deciding what I'm going to do to a seed lot to clean it, and then just the dexterity and I guess the craft that goes in to cleaning it. Like, so I love that whole tactile nature. I love that I'm doing something like when I'm working with a dirty seed lot, I am thinking the same way about, well, I don't know if that's the right word, but I'm faced with the same challenge that human beings 10,000 years ago would have been faced with,
Yeah.
like this is like how to clean this. And a lot of the same tools are what I have, wind and maybe shape and size. We have a little bit of different ways that we tackle it here. They didn't have box fans 10,000 years ago, but I just love that I am tapping into a collective cultural history that most humans share, and that like it's going back forebears and forebears, like I really that's something that I like. And then in terms of the actual like varieties, I love the unexpected. I love seeing things that I didn't, sometimes I don't like the unexpected, I must say. You wind up with something that you selected a certain way and it comes out and it looks horrible. I don't like that. But it's also but the surprise, like in a bigger picture, I can bring joy. It can bring me joy. Just at the moment, I'm disappointed. But
Yeah,
I
right.
do I do like that discovery and that journey and figuring out how the plants respond genetically and otherwise. Like it's kind of like building that relationship with the plants is what makes me happy. And it's there's crops that like for a long time I didn't really like working with squash so much, but I guess I'd had a few bad squash experiences maybe. And then as I started to work with it a bit more, I've come to really love working with the squash and the seeds, and it's just as you learn how to get things to work, it's funner and funner,
Like you
and as,
unlock different levels almost.
yeah, yes. And then as you like, if you're breeding things and you start to see the way the plant is segregating genes into different colors or shapes, that's really exciting too. Like I think the discovery is a really important part for me, but it is grounded in the craft and the work. Like they're not separate in the joy that they bring me.
Yeah. So, what can you tell me about some emergent things that have happened over the years that you've been growing for seed? I mean, you talked about, what is it, the rainbow satsoi that has come out of this? Any, new and unexpected varieties or things that worked out with breeding projects that you're really proud of?
Yeah, so there's a couple that so I have a lot of projects on the go. We have a dozen or more varieties that we've released through our seed catalog. A couple have been picked up by other seed catalogs. What would I? Well, so I think the two stories that I often contrast with each other is one is the rainbow tatsoi. So like I talked about, I had an accidental crossing, and then I wound up selecting for this tatsoi that has deep purple leaves, and that was really satisfying just seeing that come out as an accident. But I often contrast it with another project I had that was very intentional, where I started with two winter radishes, so they're storage radishes, not the like the little small red spring ones. And I had a black radish that was black on the outside and white on the inside, and quite spicy. And then I had a watermelon radish, which was green and white on the outside and red on the inside. A little bit of heat, but more sweet. And I crossed them together. Really, what I wanted, I was just dreaming of having a black radish on the outside that was red on the inside. And so I crossed both of those with that goal. And so I'm talking about emergent, I guess, properties or experiences. The first cross between those two varieties wound up with this ugly green thing that was not at all what I wanted. It was green on the purple, not green, purple. It's this purple, light purple outside, white inside. It was on the spicier side. I was not that impressed with it, but that's the F1 generation, and I knew that wasn't the end point. And I harvested those. I let them cross together. I kept the seed. And then in that F2 generation, just the diversity of different types of radishes that came out of that. Every combination of the parents and more was there. So there was stuff that was white on the inside or green on the inside and white on the outside and green on the outside and white on the inside. And then there was stuff that was like that, but was kind of red on the inside. And then there was stuff that was red on the outside and purple on the outside, and then either white inside and red and purple. And then there was some that were black on the outside and red on the inside. And right from that second year, I could see the potential. And it just, all of it, like I wanted to keep all of them. It was so hard to decide what to keep for seed, because I could see that there was 10 or 15 different varieties right there. And I kept more than I should have, but I was really focusing on those black on the inside, outside, and red on the inside. And, and keeping what you like generation after generation, it gives more and more the stuff. And at this point, we have a variety which we call the black crimson radish, which is a black radish with a red inside. And it's somewhere between 60 and 80% stable. And that means that about 60 to 80% of them will look like that on the harvest. The rest, I just can't get rid of. Like, I don't have the plant breeding skills to get it 100%. Sure. But it's fun having that diversity. Now, speaking of emergent, something that popped up somewhere in there is that there were some that were black on the inside and some were a deep purple on the inside.
Wow.
And that purple was not something that was present initially. It's something with
neither of the two.
Yeah, it was a genetic recombination that released that, and that's the one that I really fell in love with. So, and we now have a variety called black amethyst, kind of the amethyst interior, and it's a little bit more stable than the black crimson, but it's not what I expected to get. So I had an intentional project that got an intentional something, but I also got an accidental something that I really fell in love with. And that's the variety that blows people away. Like that's knocks their socks off. They like the other one, but that this one they find really really impressive. So that's sort of an emergent experience. The other thing, and the other variety or experience I would talk about is we had we had some accidental crossing in a what's that? We have what was it called? A Bulgarian carrot pepper, which is kind of like a cayenne pepper but orange. And we had grown some early on, and there was one plant that was different, and it wasn't an accidental seedling planted in the wrong place. And I suspected it had been a crossing the previous year at the seed growers, so like just like a really chance crossing, and they were rounder than the hot peppers. And I started selecting those, and I did wind up with a variety we have a round carrot bomb pepper, but that's not what I want to talk about. What I want to say is that as we got out of there, I had about 6 or 7 lines I was following, but they were all earlier than the previous variety. And that's something that I think it just kind of happened of me. I valued that earliness because we're in a short season. I don't know if it's how short it compares to your season when you were talking about your weather extremes.
I think we're just a little bit longer than you, but only by a few weeks on either side.
So we just always would select. I would value those plants that had first fruit, and it just wound up all the lines were earlier by a week at least than the initial variety, and so that was something that I loved about it, in addition to all the other characteristics of those peppers.
That's really cool. Yeah, and I love hearing stories about this with the different people that I interview about their own projects is, yeah, you can get the things that you plan for, but oftentimes the magic is in the emergent qualities that the plant world, that life will give you as it goes through its reproductive cycle, and hidden genetics start to emerge and it starts to adapt epigenetically to its place and to its conditions. All kinds of cool things are possible.
Yeah, that resonates with me, and I think that is part of the deep passion that I have. When you were asking earlier, I think those are some of the things I just love about growing the seed.
Absolutely. So when it comes to trying to get things that are consistently true to type, which have a tendency to cross, is it just a matter of keeping them far enough away? Or are there other ways that you help to get consistent results from these otherwise volatile genetics?
All right. So something you mentioned in your question was things that have a tendency to cross, because as I was saying earlier, some things don't have a tendency to cross. They're a tendency to self-pollinate. And for them, it's mostly choosing what you like, and generation after generation will tend to get more stable. But then the things that predominantly cross-pollinate, they're always looking to cross up with the diversity in your population. And there are often recessive genes that are hidden in there. And so like when I talk about these radishes I can't get fully stable, there are some recessives in there that are hidden in underneath the red genes or the purple genes that just bring out, some white colors or green colors that I don't want. And so I think there's two steps to getting something stable. The first is, and you alluded to it, is isolation distance. So if you grow a crosser, so a plant that's predominantly cross-pollinating, at least about 1,000 or 1,200 feet from another variety of the same species, you're going to probably isolate it from that crossing. You will have barely any crossing. There might be a little bit, but not much. And then the other thing to do is, in that population, get rid of what you don't like. And over generations, this is called mass selection, where you just have a big population and choose what you like. Things will move in the direction you're nudging it. Now, there may be a limit to how far you go because of those hidden recessives, and that might be fine for you. But if you want to get rid of those hidden recessives, that's where it's where it gets the advanced seed course. And one of the easy things to do would be to, let's say you have 200 plants that you've grown out. Choose your favorite 20 or 30 plants. Keep the seed from each plant separate one from another. So you're going to wind up with 30 envelopes at the end. And this is where that nomenclature or the labeling becomes really onerous, and why I kind of emphasize, don't get bogged down too much. Keep what you especially like, So you have 20 or 30 different envelopes, and then the next year you're going to grow 20 or 30 rows, or you're going to grow, let's say you saved 20 envelopes. Next year you're going to grow 20 rows or 20 little blocks, one from each envelope. And what you're seeing is, you don't always know the pollen producer in there, but you do know the plant that set the fruit. So you're evaluating at least half of the genetics. And when you grow those 20 rows out, you are going to see that most plants, and the plants look similar to the ones from the same parent, and they'll be different from the others. And of those 20, you're going to wind up maybe with 5, 6, or 7, maybe 3 or 4 that you really like, those populations. And there's going to be some that you really don't like. So start off by identifying the ones you really like and get rid of the others. And so in the case of like when we're doing the rainbow tatsoi, we did this step once or twice. We harvest the ones we don't like. They go to CSA, they go to market, and we eat them. And then the ones that are left, those 5 or 6 rows, in each row, we're going to go through and identify the plants we like the most. So maybe we'll eliminate 20 or 30% of the plants into each population. And then we can let everything go to flower and cross up. And at this point, we could just take the bulk of the seed and grow it out in the future. And that means that we'll probably have a good genetic diversity in it. Or we could decide to harvest each of these populations separately, or even individual plants you like the best. And the more narrow you select, the more you're going to go in the direction you want.
Yeah.
But the more you restrain the genetic diversity, and there are 2 things that can happen in that. One is you can wind up with inbreeding depression, which can just lower yield, create unexpected problems. But also you can lose some genetic diversity that you didn't know was hidden in there, some drought resistance or frost resistance. So this is when you're trying to fast track these processes, you're always balancing between loss of diversity and bottlenecking it and making really big steps forward. So I don't know if that's a little too technical for your listeners, but that's I think the best way to make advances is that kind of parent to selecting from individual parents.
Sure. I'm at the point
it's called seed to row.
Yeah. I'm still at the early stages of my efforts, and I've made basically 2 harvests now of a handful of things that have gotten mature to seed. I've gotten good germination from, and I'm hoping that the wild variation in our conditions are what are going to do a lot of the selection for me. In fact, a lot of what's at seed right now in my own garden is the few things that made it through our winters. We got down to, what was it, minus 12 centigrade this year. So that's like around 10 degrees Celsius or Fahrenheit, I believe. And most of my stuff got wiped out. But a few beets came through. We actually had some resprout and some survival, surprisingly, of cilantro. And that kind of stuff is like, okay, cool. If you can make it through conditions like that, that's my main selection criteria right now. And once they go through a couple of different seasons, because let's say, for example, last year was quite rainy even during the summer. This year was quite rainy in the spring. Right now, it's looking like it's going to be quite dry during the summer. And I'm hoping to get something that can increasingly make it through these swings. And then I'll start to do more of the selection for qualities, flavor, other categories of desirable traits that I'm looking for. But I'm really looking for that proof of survivability before anything. Have you done similar things to adaptations for your own climate, or have you been lucky enough to have good seed growers around you that most of what you sourced initially was already very hardy to your conditions?
Oh, a first step is always kind of like trialing, it's screening the stuff, so we've grown a lot of varieties, and there are some I don't even bother trying to work with.
Yeah.
And then there are And then there are some that are surprisingly well adapted. And I always look for that. Like we're working with yard long beans right now, and we've trialed about 15 varieties. And there was one that was just so much earlier yielding than the others. And for our climate, that makes a difference. Yeah. So I think the first thing is just like the genetic potential of the variety, you know, like trialing it beside a couple others is a good first step, because there's no reason to work with a unsuited variety for a long time to get to the same point that somebody else is already at. Yeah. So trial stuff. And then, but yeah, so I think a lot of what I was talking about, like kind of like, you know, the row to seed and separate choosing the different plants, that's especially true when you're working with something that you cross up initially and that you're looking for maybe some physical characteristics, you know, like either appearance, color, or shape. But if you can also just start with a variety. Yeah. And just there's diversity. You hope there's diversity in that variety and just keep refining it. And in that case, we've definitely wound up with stuff like peppers. So if I have a named variety that I'm not crossing, I'm just trying to maintain, when I harvest it for seed, the first thing I'm always doing is I'm looking for the parents of the next generation. So I go through and I will flag. It's a varying number of plants depending on the species, but with peppers it might be 10 or 15 plants that I'll select. If it was going to be a Brassica green, I would probably select more like 80 or 100 plants. But so I'll look at those plants, and I'm going to be looking at earliness. Are they fruiting earlier than others? Do they have a heavy set of fruit? In the case of a pepper, is there a nice leaf cover that's covering them so they're not going to get sun scald? And I'm doing all those things. This is a named variety. I'm just choosing the ones that look the most like I want the variety to look. And I'll harvest those enough for my own seed stock initially, and that'll be next year's generation. And then the rest we're going to harvest for sale as seed. And with that, I wind up with varieties that are earlier looking. They're going to be maybe deeper the color you're looking for. If you want to add a tasting step in, and we do that with some things, like so that with the peppers, you could take 2 or 3 peppers from each of your favorite plants, like take a Sharpie or a marker and just write, 1, 1, 1, on the 3 number first plant, 2, 2, 2 on the 3 second fruits. And then we'll bring them indoors, and no, we don't eat the part that has a Sharpie on it, but we'll taste the rest of the fruits, and there'll be differences, and there'll be some that are sweeter, some that have, different kinds of textures, and we'll choose the ones we like best, and that'll make the next population better. So we have tastier fruit than we did before. With the hot peppers, we'll test to see, is it the right heat level? Because some things you want them to be mild, some things you want to be very hot, and if you don't taste, there's kind of like a little drift that happens with it. So definitely that's something that just choosing what's frost resistant, choosing what's disease resistant, choosing what's tastiest, choosing what's earliest, just doing that has had an impact on our seed lines. And that's kind of what I think the real potential is for growing seed on your farm, is that it's adapted to your climate. And I don't think
your preferences, yeah.
And to your preferences, yeah. And it's hard for me to imagine a world that goes back to really totally bioregional. I mean, I really hope that we don't get into that world, because it's going to be forced on us. But it is really great to have those bioregional adaptations. It just, some climate, like we're in a climate that is, we have the humidity. We don't have extreme heat. It's rare that it gets over like 32 Celsius. There's a lot of seed grown elsewhere that does work for us. But I know some climates are not as, you're either cooler or very hot, extra dry or extra humid. Specific varieties make a really big difference in those conditions. Higher elevation, shorter seasons. So, and already there's things that we can't grow because of our climate, but there are more things than maybe some other people. So I don't lean into it as much, just the value of that climatic adaptation, but it is happening. And it is a real reason to grow some seed.
Yeah, I mean, like the condition I was telling you about earlier, how cold we got, we were at 32 by the end of May this year, and it's likely going to continue to get worse. So that kind of swing in weather conditions is really what I'm just trying to get us around. Again, because we're in a weird little micro pocket where I can't necessarily rely on either the seed or the growing advice of seed catalog or a grower, I don't know, 10, 15 kilometers away. It's that small. And so all the more like that's really what's behind the motivation that I have. And it's really cool to hear your experience. And I also feel very fortunate. I don't know how it is where you are. I'm sure it's quite good that there is a real revival right now of people growing under these conditions and for these specific outcomes that mean that you can hit the ground running if you're just starting. I mean, a lot of what I am planting out right now, all right, may not have been grown in my area, but is not coming from very far away and is from a heritage line that's been productive for people here for goodness knows how long before mechanization and F1 hybrids and GMO seeds came onto the scene. And it's really cool that this is culture that people can tap into and that we have the potential to contribute to as well in our own smaller efforts here. Now, before we start to wrap things up, I did want to touch on one aspect which I'm probably still a few seasons away from getting into, which is the business of growing and selling seed. I've heard a lot of people talk about the key profitability considerations for market garden crops, which I'm sure you're familiar with as well. What are those criteria or things to consider when considering marketing and growing seed to make sure that this is something that can actually keep the operation afloat?
Well, there's two big things to consider. One, well, I guess there's two ways you can sell your seed, and that has a big impact on the profitability factors. So the first is, are you selling bulk seed, so in volume, to a seed company, either on a contract or on speculation, or maybe you're selling bulk seed to other growers, or are you selling seed in a small packet to a home gardener, maybe to a farmer, but it's in a much smaller packet, like a garden size seed. And those are different, have a difference in profitability. The bulk seed, this is much more comparable to growing vegetables because the bulk of the cost is producing the seed. Like if you want to make more money on a vegetable farm, or you want to make more money on a bulk seed farm, you can choose different varieties. You can change some of your mechanization, but ultimately, often you have to grow more. Like there's a real direct correlation between production and profit, or production and sales volume. Profit, there's different ways to do it, but it's really based on the production side.
Is this mostly because it takes more or less the same amount of time to grow and produce a small amount of seed as it does a larger volume? Like not all of the tasks scale up with quantity?
Well, does your question relate to when I'm distinguishing between bulk and seed pack, or just?
I'm just wondering where the efficiency in there lies. Like, is that the biggest difference? Because you're going through the same steps in growing, processing, storing, whether you're producing a small amount or whether it's a medium to large amount, and not all of those tasks scale with the quantity. Like,
let me talk about the tax first, and then it might change your question.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So bulk seed is more comparable to growing vegetables in the way profitability works. But seeds in a pack is different because the margin is is different. Like if you're selling a head of lettuce, 70% of the let's say 50, I don't know, a chunk goes in production. But if you're selling a pack of seed, let's say the pack retails for $4, there might only be 20 to 40 cents of seed inside that pack. So what makes the pack profitable is not the growing of the seed. What makes the pack profitable is the marketing of the seed. The question becomes much more, how many packs can you sell? Yeah. Because if you have a really higher margin on a seed pack, but you can only sell 10 packs, that's not a lot of sales going into your pocket. But if you can sell 1,000 packs, it's very different. So if you think about a cherry tomato, the amount of seeds in a cherry tomato can maybe go into 3 packs of seed, right? So that cherry tomato can produce $12 of sales. But how many packs can you sell? So if you can sell 2,000 packs, then a bed of cherry tomatoes is very profitable. And so that's the real limiting factor with a pack-based seed company, is it's really about marketing. That's going to make the biggest difference if you can sell more. Whereas if you are growing a pound of cherry tomato seed and maybe selling $400, selling for $400, that can still be profitable, but it's not like a wild profitability like $12 from one cherry tomato.
I gotcha.
So the profit then about the bulk seed really comes into, growing the right number of the right crop planting. So you grow the right number of plants without too much overage, so that, being able to weed efficiently, being able to harvest efficiently, those things come in. And there's a certain limit to where you can get to. And then if you want to make 2 or 3 times more money, then you're going to just have to grow 2 or 3 times more crop. But with the seed pack, to make 2 or 3 times more money, it's really a marketing decision. And then you're getting into social media. You're getting into how you build relationships with clients. You're getting into, do you have a print catalog or not? And I would say that it is not the secret way to get rich. Sometimes farmers are struggling with their vegetables and like, okay, I'll grow seed and that'll do it. But then you grow seed all summer, you grow crop all summer, and you're exhausted from there. And then the winter, you're still working all winter because you're packing seed, shipping orders, and then you're also having to do all kinds of marketing stuff and become a master of other things, which might stimulate you. But if you don't like being in the office, I don't think that's the secret way to keep your business afloat.
No, and usually adding complexity is not an efficient route to profitability. It can really help with resilience as things increasingly fluctuate, but usually complexity is not conducive to efficiency. Those two tend to be at odds with one another, right? But I definitely understand better at that with that explanation, the difference between producing for bulk and producing for packets. And so, so my question initially then was much towards the bulk growing, right? If you can get into a level of efficiency with, I guess when you're growing for bulk, you're already going for a large amount. So the efficiency in the post-production and the processing and the packaging and all of that, I guess that's something you have to work out regardless of what you're making. It's just as much of an issue for the market gardener as it is for the seed producer.
It definitely is. And I think that, okay, I'm trying to say if this is true or not. I think that there could be a potential for more profitability in seed crops than market crops if you know what you're doing and you can get the right price. And that's another element with it. When you're negotiating a seed contract, if it's a common variety that somebody can get from anywhere, they might not be willing to pay a price to you that's really worth it. But if it's a variety that's unique to you, so if you have been selecting a variety in your bioclimate or bioregion for 10 years and it's better adapted than anything on the market, you can name a better price if you're going to grow that on contract for somebody else than if you're just a variety that people can find anywhere else. So the price has a really big impact, because if you can get twice the price for it and it's the same amount of work to grow, your margin has just shot up.
Right. I think that applies to a lot of artisan crafts in general, right? Because you're never going to compete with the massive seed producers on these common varieties the same way you're not going to compete on price with Walmart or Amazon for a common household item, right? There's just economies of scale that these established companies are never going to let a smaller producer compete with them on, and you'll burn yourself out or go broke trying. And so for anybody on a smaller scale or medium, quality and uniqueness is much more competitive than trying anything else at these larger bulk or commodity levels.
Definitely quality and uniqueness. And that uniqueness can be the variety, but it can also be your relationship with the variety and your relationship with an area. If stuff is grown, people like to support local producers, and they like to support things that they can trust, whether or not the variety is unique to that area.
Yeah. Have you seen the demand in the market for specialty seeds, for heritage or locally adapted seeds change since you started producing yourself?
I have seen it change, but there's sort of two stories that are going along. One is the market, and one is the way we are able to respond to the market. Because there's just naturally, as we build an audience, we can find more demand. It doesn't mean it necessarily wasn't there before. But definitely there was a spike during COVID where folks decided to grow their own again. And
I remember
all
that.
the seed companies I know just saw explosions in their growth. That lasted a year or two, and there has almost all the seed companies I know now are kind of in a bit of a slump after that. Sometimes it's higher than it was before, but I think what has happened right now, without talking about the customer demand and whether it really, so it definitely has gone a bit since the peak down. Okay, the customer demand has definitely gone down since the peak, but there's also more competition than there was before. There are people that realized there's a market to be tapped and are buying in seed from other places and packing into small packs and just reselling it. And there's more competition than there was before. So that also means that the pie is, there's more people who are trying to, I'm mixing the metaphors there, but
No, I got you.
there's more people that we're sharing the market between more people. And some of them are not necessarily small ecological organic producers who have the same values. It's just a way to make money.
Sure.
And I hope that as things shake out, the folks who really do have the quality and the values that the customers are looking for manage to emerge and come on top.
I would certainly hope that as well. Well, look, that covers pretty much all that I was trying to get to today. Dan, not only have you given really cool advice to help to guide some of the things that I'm doing already, but you also have a ton of resources to help listeners follow up on this and go deeper into anything as they're going through their own experiments. Can you tell us, well, first of all, where to get the book and the rest of the resources you have out there online?
All right, so the book is called The Seed Farmer. It's published by New Society Publisher, so you could order directly from them, but it's available through most book retailers. I don't know about internationally, but definitely across North America. I do know Amazon carries it if that's who you want to support. And you can order it from us, but if we're shipping overseas, the shipping is high. So finding someone local is definitely a great way to go. I do host the Seed Farmer podcast. And in the Seed Farmer podcast, I interview all kinds of seed growers. Some are market growers, some are seed farmers, some are people who've approached it different ways. And we go deep into the journeys that have brought them to seed. And we also have I always make a point of having a pretty technical conversation with growers. So it's a great way to learn hands-on. And there's a diversity of voices, so different scales. So you'll find definitely somebody who speaks to you. And then I have a blog at danbrisebois.com where I write about seed. And, I have a whole other life about crop planning and spreadsheets too. The Farmer Spreadsheet Academy, you can find out about there too. So
that's what we're talking about, because I think myself and a lot of other growers out there who are starting to scale up their operations, that's a scary little realm to get into, but you really have the numbers and the spreadsheets nailed down. And I think that's a fantastic resource that we should mention here.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so if I want to explain more about the Farmer Spreadsheet Academy, so it's a side project I have. I did write a book about 15 years ago called Crop Planning for Organic Vegetable Growers, and this is kind of the continuation of that. And so with Farmer Spreadsheet Academy, my main thing is I have an online crop planning course where folks can really go to town crop planning. And I have some free crop planning templates also that are quite thorough too. There is a writing project that is kind of tied to some topics, but I'm not at a point yet where I'm kind of talking a lot about it, but there'll be more soon.
Okay. I like that teaser. Definitely let me know when that starts to come to fruition as well. Dan, this was super fun. I love this topic in general, and your experience and your insights were super valuable to me. I'm sure they will be for the listeners as well. I really want to thank you for your time, and I hope we can stay in touch in the future.
It's been a real pleasure. You had great questions, and I want to know more about the seed that you're growing. So I'd love to hear about it in the future too.
I'll keep you posted. I'll send you some pictures as I get into a better organizational system, and maybe some pictures of what the crops are looking at like in the field as well.
Fantastic.
Now, before we wrap this up, just remember that these episodes are only the beginning of the learning resources, design and coaching services, in-person courses, and interactive community that are available through Regenerative Skills. The Discord server is our free community where you can connect with other like-minded listeners, exchange ideas, stories, tips, and resources, as well as interact with me directly and quite a few former guests from this show. Our Instagram account @regen_skills is the best place to see the projects that me and the team are working on, both for clients and collaborators, as well as on our own properties. I'll also be announcing the certification courses, workshops, and gatherings that we've got coming up later this year. If you're interested in getting dedicated support for your own project, you can now schedule a free planning session with one of our team members through the request form on our website. You can also find all the links, show notes, and past resources there at regenerativeskills.com. We truly believe that no matter your experience, your knowledge, abilities, resources, or background, you can be a powerful force for regeneration on this planet, and we're here to help you find your path. So as always, remember to keep taking those little steps every day towards a regenerative future, and I'll be right by your side along the way.